So with the coronavirus, it's been a long time since I've had to stand at the front like this. So it feels very strange talking to an audience here. But what I would like to do this afternoon is try to give an overview of what we've been talking about, and particularly, if you like, looking at the research side and what I'm trying to use, my favorite term, a paradigm shift in that. And I can't read the slides from here, but never mind, there. So looking at this idea of research in science education, I'm trying to bring up three terms. First of it is what? What is it that we're going to look at? Secondly, it's why. Why are we doing that? And of course, the third thing is, as many of the others have said, is how. How are we going to carry out the type of research and the type of developments that we're after? So, really, 5 areas that I try to cover related to the earlier speakers, I feel. The first one, obviously, the idea of STEM or STEM education was presenting there, and having a look at that as a single subject, or is it, as it was suggested, an integration? The second area I've got there is preparing the teachers and the research into looking at how we can develop science teachers or science-related, if I may use that term, to make sure that I'm covering the STEM idea within what I'm trying to say. The third one there, I guess the science part is played in what we're doing, and how important is the science itself for science education and the science teacher. The fourth one there, looking at the how part, the concerns that we have that research needs to address. And perhaps the last one there, going a little bit further there, and perhaps looking at how much are we really wanting to do it for and with the society. It's looking into what it means to the whole people that we're trying to interrelate with. So, research in science education there. And the word that I'm trying to emphasize as I go here now is, one thing I predict is change. So science education has to cope with change. Change has been going on in the past, and I'm going to make a prediction there that there's change in the future. So it's not going to remain constant, it has to develop. We need to have that research in how we might be able to develop it. And again, the what, the why, and the how is driving this, what we've got there. And I'm particularly wanting to focus it here, looking at the future. So it's the future society, the future careers that we're looking for, many of them perhaps that are unknown today, but still we're preparing people for that era. Just as my education goes back a long way now, preparing me for trying to help people, help teachers, help develop curricula into the future. So I'm going to try and present a little bit more with that. Science, is it the truth? Well, I guess we started with science many years ago, way back, but it's changed, of course. So change is there definitely with the science. And if you like those elements, great there. But of course, I don't think we believe this is an idea of an elemental base for our chemistry or science at all. Yet, we recognize, and I think we understand, where in the past these could have played an important role. But coping with change is, I keep saying there, and that has come about, one of them being education for all. The idea of compulsory education has come about and driven, I suggest to you, by the Industrial Revolution. So science, tied up with technology, has driven educational advances from a very early on. And this, if you like, is the legacy that Britain gives to the rest of the world, because it had a big role to play in this industrial revolution, because it was there that they were able to get hold of the idea of steam power, developing that, and started the technology going. For example, in the cotton industry, the spinning jenny, to be able to make, spinning the cotton, to make clothes in the early times was very much in Britain. The steam engine, but before it all of that really was the pump. The steam energy giving the pump to be able to pump the water out of the coal mines, iron ore mines, that drove the whole revolution there, and people having to work in these industries, which in turn was driving the idea of school education. And so change going on from then, changing our research directions that we're going, and certainly in my lifetime, the big change came about in the 20th century, driven by, and I can use the term I hope, the Sputnik. This really hit in Britain, which was at the forefront of educational developments, science education developments, and in the US, which was also there. And I mention those two countries in particular because they were the funding. They had the money behind them for the research. And so they were really shocked that the USSR could put up a satellite. And that really made a huge change in the way that education, science education, had to be visualized in that there. And that change, I suggest to you, was really moving away from science being a body of knowledge into what I've described as a way of thinking. It shifted this from, you like, this behaviorist model of learning where you just poured the knowledge in, the teacher gave you the information, and then more information, and you try to absorb that, into this idea that it is the students that do the constructing. And so they have got to play a big role in their learning, and the teacher is now the facilitator, helping the students in their learning. And that, I suggest to you, was a huge paradigm shift in the way of thinking. And much of the developments that have taken since then, really I'm now talking about the 1960s, have built on that shift that we've seen there. And I give you a quote from John Dewey, although much before that time, which sums up really what I'm talking about here. The purpose of education is not to transmit information, but to create thinkers, to be able to think for oneself, be able to operate for oneself. So the shift in science education I can express in other words as well. And so here I'm suggesting education through science rather than science through education. The shift from the science being the focus, and education is doing it, to education being the focus, and science playing this strong role in that there. And this, I'm suggesting there, is expressed very much through the idea of scientific literacy, which is a paradigm shift, I'm suggesting, in the way we were looking at science education. And I've summed it up there, or tried to sum it up, of what is the difference between the two. And I think you will notice, if you look at the highlighted bits on the right, the idea of the society coming in, the education relating the science to the society. Whereas on the left, it was the science that was the major focus. And I've given you a number of attributes there that try to represent the type of shift that I have in mind there. Building on this, then, I think you can see my education through science there and STEM education are almost talking about the same thing. The STEM education seeing that science is playing a role in the society, is playing a role associating with careers, and so providing the students with this sort of background, the theoretical science is not enough. We're going to link it, obviously, with technology. It's always been there, but we've just used the word science to include the technology as well. STEM has recognized that the designing part also can come in, so an engineering type aspect associated with it. And of course, certainly in my day when I was at school, mathematics played a very strong role in the scientific learning that we've got. And the big shift now is, it was suggested earlier, integration, putting it all together. Not saying that it has to be science and technology and engineering and mathematics, it must have all of that in it, but it draws from those bases in whatever you're teaching. And I use the word science now, but I could use just the word chemistry. And so in a chemistry lesson, it could be STEM, or in a physics lesson, or in a general science lesson, much as Professor Park was saying earlier on. You could use it in different ways. So it's this shift, I suggest there, more related to the society of the future and providing a base on which they can build rather than just learning the subject by itself. And I use here the idea of promoting it through a real life situation, a situation to which the students can identify. They may even feel that it's a motivational aspect associated with their learning. And in order to do that, I suggest that we're shifting the education now into areas which I've labeled there, for want of convenience, as VASC. Other people have called it competencies, and you can see there, putting it that way around, that the value of the learning, if it's for a career, we hope it has value. So value plays an important role. Attitudes, this idea of interest, liking, enjoyment associated with it, yes, certainly is going to play a strong role. Plus the word skills, whether I mean knowledge skills, procedural skills, or metacognitive skills, skills in whatever way, and the knowledge itself, whether it's informational or it's comprehension, application, analysis type of knowledge, all coming together. And the approach, perhaps I've got there, is project-based. We should be talking in STEM, but if you want to, maybe it's inquiry learning-based. So you start with inquiring in, or if you wish, problem-based. So it starts from some problem orientation. But integration, interdisciplinarity. Yes, we can certainly suggest that this also is an important move forward. So in this type of science education there, I've suggested that relevance plays an important role. Relevance is part of this interdisciplinarity that we want to achieve there. And we're looking at that from a student's perspective of relevance, or trying to look at it, rather than what the teacher themselves may feel on that. Research into much of this has been mentioned before, very much brings in the idea of the transversal skill, or Helen didn't use it, but she was using it earlier, the 21st century skills. Skills like problem solving, decision making, collaboration, cooperation. All of these are part of the education scene, and therefore part of education through science. They're playing a crucial role in how we move forward in that. And as everybody else has stressed, the science learning itself must be conceptually appropriate for the way in which we're thinking, and we would not accept those elements I was mentioning at the beginning of fire, earth, and air, and what else did I have? Forgotten. Those, no, we wouldn't accept. That isn't the conceptual science as we have developed it today. So, looking at the transversal side, how might we go into doing some research in this type of area? And I particularly give you the idea of research in science education via a case study. And three aspects associated with a case study we could well bring in. And the first one is shadowing, is following the teacher, how the teacher is actually going about the teaching, and see how they behave, interact with the students. The second one is to interview. We could carry out interviews and find out, get information that way. Face-to-face interviews. And the third one that I've got there is, of course, going into the literature. What does the document say? What does the literature have to say? How much of a background can that provide for the type of research that we want to do? So, science education is not just looking at the science. The research in science education is obviously looking at techniques that go into the educational field, as many of the other speakers have actually said. So the idea of PCK coming through, the pedagogical content knowledge, is obviously very important alongside the content knowledge associated with the subject. And so we get this distinction, if we like, between the different attributes that the science teacher is asked to cope. And both of these play an important role. And again, I stress again, associated with the what, why are we doing it, and how best to go about that research that we want to find out about. So, in the teacher education, I mentioned the PCK side, which is very much interconnected with the content there and the pedagogical, or even the general pedagogical side of how you speak, where you look, how you smile, or I was going to say for Helen, using the famous expression, as well, whatever we do. So we've got that side as well. And one of the problems is that in the teacher education, we often assume that the content knowledge is there. But of course it's evolving, it's developing, and in the school they haven't had time to consolidate a lot of that there. So it's a false assumption. And so we do have a problem. You may have to cope with the idea that the science isn't there when you come training the teacher, and how to help the teacher build this up as they're building up their teaching ability as well. So research needs to have a look at how we help the teacher fill this science gap that potentially could be there, and help them ready for the science that's going to come as things develop. The chirality that we were talking of earlier there, I actually learned when I was in school. That was a long time ago, but yes. But then again, I did a lot of science when I was in the upper school, because this was the British way, that you had 13 years of schooling, not 12, and you specialised. So at the end of the time, I was doing basically 3 subjects: chemistry, physics and maths. And so you had a lot of lessons and you could build up that sort of thing. But today we're looking at things much broader, and so that isn't there, and we need to cope with that. And of course, the changing society also plays an important role in the way in which we act, behave, and interact with the type of students. An example, perhaps, trying to relate to that problem that is there when it gets rather conceptual in science. And I've taken chemistry again. You have to excuse me, but somehow in the past I did a PhD study in chemistry in the days when really science education, certainly research in science education, or getting a PhD in science education didn't exist. But in terms of the redox, teachers often finding there's a problem. The problem in particular is trying to link the ions and the electron shift in what we're doing, and particularly with something like the dichromate ion there. And looking at the research to that, just a way which you might be able to do it, again, classroom observation. How the teacher handles, how the students interact with that. A second one there would be to actually make recordings of the lesson, so you can look at it and go through it afterwards. And a third one there, of course, the idea of interviews structured to the type of problems that the teacher may have faced and the students were pointing out in that. So we've got a lot of implications that I'm trying to suggest in the type of research that is done in science education. It isn't just on the subject, it's looking at the how that goes on in the classroom itself. So Now we've got to address this change area. So, how do we do that research that provides that evidence that we want to look for? And I'm suggesting we've done this in the past through the idea of STS, Science, Technology, Society, trying to see how these can be going to go through taking real-world problems, and if you like, the forerunner for STEM there. And in that, the shift very much coming through, I've called IBSE, this inquiry-based science education. So we've got to get the students actually involved in this, either by a very open approach, so the students do all the thinking themselves, maybe too difficult for students, particularly at an early level, and so the teacher may try to guide them in certain areas to guide their thinking. It may be the question right at the beginning. What is that question we're going to address? It may be this helping them to suggest a procedure for trying to find an answer to the question. Or it may well be that it's much more structured in the teaching by the teacher, so the students are able to move forward by the teacher providing the structure there, and the teacher, if you like, scaffolding the students as needed so that they can play a role individually or as a group as the learning moves forward. And this is really what I'm talking about when I've used this scientific literacy, bringing in this idea of inquiry-based learning and trying to help the students build on this so that it's meaningful for them. And we tried, and I think Raquel was pointing out in a project, a three-stage approach that I've tried to illustrate here, that at the beginning we want to have a look at the situation. Where is this learning that we want in the science? What situation? So that it's meaningful for the students. It, if you like, is motivational for the students. And very often I'm suggesting this could be a concern for the students. First stage. Second stage, very much to learn the science background associated with that. And thirdly, to try and have a look at the concern that was addressed at the beginning, and to try and look at the decisions that might be made based on not only scientific knowledge, but other social attributes as well. And that is how I've described approaches at the bottom there. But where do we perhaps go? Have we gone far enough? I'm suggesting that maybe looking at the society, the changes in the society, the moving forward, maybe the science education has got to feed the idea, the operation of the society itself. So this idea of transdisciplinary from the school learning into what it is the science is going, or the science education is going to do for the society, for and with the societal. If you like, the sustainable future we're beginning, and the role of science, and hence through science education, in moving that forward. And maybe this is our next paradigm shift of how we might be able to do that. At the moment, I think the universities are grappling with this, and maybe this is what the schools need to be concerned with in the future. And so very summarizing therefore there, so research needs associated with relevance, it's got to have relevance there, associated with the science and the society and the technology engineering associated with it. It's got to develop these transversal type skills as appropriate in learning the educational attributes that we want. And all of this is building on the educational theories that are driving these changes that I've tried to bring in. And hence, right at the end there, enhancing science education. I couldn't finish without saying that all of it has to have a validity, reliability, and you can't say it's real appropriate research in science education unless it conforms to these attributes. So the concern always in doing the research, we've got to make sure it's valid, it has a strong validity, and it is reliable in trying to achieve what it's set out to achieve on that. So, in a way, I'm providing the background for the sidecar project that Raquel mentioned earlier, which is a project that is European Union with Estonia, Finland, Israel involved in it, trying to see the attractiveness of science, promoting science teachers, and, of course, helping career awareness. And it has its own targets within that one is trying to actually achieve during the lifetime of the project. And with that, I thank you, and I will stop here. Thank you.
Thank you. And if I look at the screen there, then the screen says that you used more time than you should have, so that no questions.
Oh, dear.
So, like Rachel, you don't get any questions. Yes.
That's good, because you won't ask me anything.
Yes, I don't. So.